In this video, we will be covering Chapter 7, Networking, Connecting Computing Devices of Technology in Action, 16th edition. First, we need to understand computer networks. All right. A computer network is simply two or more computers that are connected via software and hardware so they can communicate with each other. Each device that is on that network is called a node. And as we can see from my picture on the right, we have laptops, desktop, printers, fax machines, game consoles, entertainment consoles, iPads, tablets, IoT devices. The list probably goes on and on and on at this point in the world. Those are all nodes. And it really doesn't matter. The wireless router is also a node. A normal router would be a node. An access point would be a node. There's just so many different devices nowadays that are on our networks. It's kind of crazy. Later we'll talk about accessing your wireless router and some, possible configurations and things like that for it. But there are a lot of things out there that we connect to our networks nowadays. Some of those are joining and leaving, like your phone. So when you come home, it connects to your wireless router and it becomes a node there. And then when you leave your home, it's on the cellular data until you connect to the next Wi-Fi point. So sometimes our nodes are jumping from one to the next. And there are going to be several benefits to having a computer network. The first and probably the most important one, which is why we have computer networks in homes, is sharing the internet connection. All right. This allows us to have one internet connection coming into our house, so you're only paying one company for that having internet, and then you have all of your different devices connecting back to that one single internet connection. All right. Another big benefit for some, not for others, is the capability of sharing your printer. So if you only have one printer in your house, instead of having to, when you want to print, go up to it, plug it into your computer, and hit print, you can just go on have your computer be connected to Wi-Fi, say print to the printer, connected to such and such computer, or right to the wireless router, depending on your printer type, and you are good to go. Many families also will enjoy the option for sharing pictures and files and things like that between computers without having to use a flash drive or an external hard drive or something to be able to transfer your media. Now, that's not to say that the flash drive may not be the better option for transferring data. And the reason I say that is USB 3.0 has the capability of 5 gigabits per second, or 5,000 megabits per second. Many home networks, especially if you're dealing with Wi-Fi, may only be in the 100 megabit per second range. So it could be faster for you to transfer files to your flash drive, unplug it from that computer, walk to another one, plug your flash drive in, transfer the data to that computer, than it is actually to transfer it over your network. So that is something that you do want to think about when you are dealing with large files. Now, if you're dealing with smaller files, that is not the end of the world. Whether it takes a little bit longer, but that is something to think about. Some companies will actually mail hard drives instead of trying to transfer data over the internet because of their internet connection speed. It's maybe faster for them to fill a 5 terabyte or 10 terabyte hard drive up at location A and send it through the mail, USPS or whatever, you can do next day or 2 day, and then have it show up wherever that is, and then copy all the data off of it instead of actually trying to transfer everything over the internet. So just one of those things that you do need to think about when you're dealing with transferring files over the network. Another big benefit of the using a network is computers on different networks can communicate still. So that is another option for you. If you're running, your Android phone connected to your Windows PC, and you have a laptop from Mac, and whatever else, they all can talk to each other. You might be able to send files. Again, printing is another benefit there. So having a computer network at home is going to possibly save you a lot of hassle and time. However, the big disadvantage to having a computer network at home is setting it up. All right, and this is something that I have dealt with time and time again. I've set my dad up a computer network for his small business, and I can't tell you how many times I went home for break or over breaks or things like that when I was in college, or even when I was going home as a teacher, And he'd be like, yeah, I can't talk to my front computer anymore. My front can talk to my back, but my back can't talk to the front. And I'd be like, okay. And then I had to go and troubleshoot why, he can't see the files on those other computers. So setup time and troubleshooting and like why something isn't working, or, my wireless printer, I can't print to it anymore, things like that. So there are some drawbacks to having a computer network set up and having it set up well. Some things that you want to think about when we're talking about how data is going to be moving through a network. So the data transfer rate, you might hear this called the bandwidth, is the maximum speed data can be transmitted. So you have a bandwidth with your ISP, your internet service provider at home. Until I started teaching classes online, I was having a 10 megabit per second internet connection at home with a 1 megabit upload. And that was fine for watching Netflix and YouTube and things like that. Having now gone to teaching online and uploading these wonderful videos and whatever else we're doing and having to download lots of files and things like that, I decided it was time to update our internet speeds to I believe it's 50 meg down and 5 meg up. So I can now upload the YouTube videos and things like that and download all your files and stuff like that a lot faster. So bandwidth is your data transfer rate, the max speed. But then you also have what's called throughput, and that is the actual speed that data is being transferred. So you may pay your ISP for a 10 megabit per second internet connection, and that is all well and good, but you may only actually see 8 megabit or 5 megabit or something along those lines. So that is something that you do want to take into account. Remember, when we are talking about internet speeds and stuff like that, we are talking in megabit, B-I-T, not byte. All right, so we're dealing with 1 megabit would only be like 1.2 megabytes, something like that. Not even 1.1 megabyte. 1 megabit is only like 0.15 megabytes. All right, so let's go with simpler route here. 8 megabit is 1 megabyte. All right, so just something to think about when you're like, well, why? The internet says I'm only downloading at 5 megs or whatever. And it's like, well, your browser is telling you in megabytes, where your internet service provider is telling you in megabits. So that is something that is very important to keep track of. Now we are starting to get to the point where gigabit is being a thing. All right, I have a new computer, I have a server at my house, and I have a gigabit switch between them, so I can actually have 1,000 megabits per second of data being transferred between them. And normally, this wouldn't be a big issue for me, but every once in a while, I'm like, I got to transfer this video file or whatever to my server. So having that 1,000 megabit per second is definitely being very helpful. Now, when it comes to network design, there are multiple options here. All right. First, we can classify networks by distance. All right. One of the things that you may have heard of, or if you read the back of your router, is WAN and LAN. All right. So normally on your wireless router at your house, there is a WAN port, which stands for Wide Area Network, and this is going to span a large physical distance. All right. And you also normally have some LAN ports, or Local Area Network, and this is normally located within a small geographical area, as in your house. All right. So those two are probably the most common ones that you will hear in everyday life when you're talking with your friends or things like that. All right. Now, if you're going to get into this for more business purposes and things like that, there are some other options. So we also have PAN, which is smaller than LAN, if we look at our little icon on the top right there. And that is our personal area network. And this is used to communicate among devices close to one person. All right. One PAN that you might be used to using is Bluetooth. All right. So your cell phone, you have the Bluetooth connect to your car, maybe to your smartwatch, maybe you're talking from your Bluetooth or from your phone to your tablet over Bluetooth, or you're using like an app on your phone to control PowerPoint or something like that over Bluetooth. So PAN is one that we might be doing. I'd also qualify that if you did a hotspot on your phone, that would be a PAN, a personal area network. So you're using your phone as a hotspot to allow your laptop's access to the internet via the cellular connection on your phone. So I'd call that one a PAN. So we have PAN is the smallest, then we have LAN, then we have HAN, which this says is a home area network, and this is a specific type of LAN located in a home. All right. it's another little justification there. All right, and then the next bigger one is a MAN, or a metropolitan area network. This is a large network designed to provide access to a specific geographic area, such as an entire city. All right. One nice example that I like to use is HCC. We have all those different buildings on campus. They're not all one network or one network type. All right, you would have multiple different networks there. So you would have, say, a MAN as the campus. That itself would be the metropolitan area network. Now again, that's probably a little bit bigger than HCC, but my point still stands. And then as you go from campus down to specific buildings, then you would probably go into more LAN, or local area. So each building has its own LAN. That then connects to the metropolitan area network of campus, and then that campus then connects to the WAN, or the wide area network. That's the entire state or world, or however you want to go by it, and via one single internet connection. So just something to think about. Another option is we can classify networks by levels of administration. So we have in a client-server network, in which a client computer on which users accomplish tasks and make requests. So that would be the laptops, the desktops, those types of things. And then we have servers, which are computers that provide information or resources to the client computers. Well, this would be your standard business setup. So they're going to probably have a client-server network. And this is a lot of administration issues. It saves them time. For example, when you log into on a computer on campus, you're not actually logging into that specific computer. You're actually logging onto the network. So the computer sends information back to a server that says, hey, this is the username, this is the password, should I let them on? And the server says, by all means, yes, they are allowed on the network. They have entered the correct information, so you can let them on. Or if you don't, you can't get on the network. So that's another option. You also have peer-to-peer networks, as we talked about a little bit earlier. This is closer to a PAN, I would say. But on a peer-to-peer network, each node is connected on the network, can communicate directly with every other node on the network. So as you can see in that little picture, we have a tablet which can talk directly to the laptop, to the phone, to the desktop, and to the printer, and everything else vice versa. So your local area network that you would have at your house, which has a router and whatnot in it, is not really a peer-to-peer network, because your devices talk to the router, which then send information out to the individual devices. That actually almost be more of a client-server network, what you have at your house, where the router is your very, very small server, where it's directing the flow of information and things like that. So, peer-to-peer network. Lastly, networks can be classified by protocols used, and most protocols, or most networks, or computer networks at least, that we are using Ethernet. And this was developed by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or IEEE. This Ethernet standard does apply to both wireless and wired networks. So this does cover Wi-Fi as well. Wi-Fi, I believe, is 802.11. I'm not sure what the Ethernet standard is. I think it's like 802.3 or something along those lines. The ability of those devices on the network to use earlier standards in addition to the current standard is known as backward compatibility. So this would be, I have a really old desktop or whatever on my network which doesn't quite have the new Wi-Fi classifications, all right? So I have, a device that only has Wi-Fi, which is 2.4 gigahertz. Well, my network is 5 gigahertz and 2.4. Well, my network is backward compatible because it can still talk to that 2.4 gigahertz device. So one of those things to think about, network design. There's a lot that goes into it. It can be a very simple thing when you're designing your networks, just like you have at home. You're like, I set my wireless router up, I connect my devices to it, all is well and good. I can see my printer, I have access to the internet, I'm happy. Or it can be as complicated as it is in a business world, like HCC, where each building has its own different rules and regulations. You have different Wi-Fi networks, and depending on which Wi-Fi network you're on, you can connect to different servers and things like that on campus. And there's what's called virtual LANs, which if I'm on VLAN 1 and you're on VLAN 2, we can't talk. But if we're both on VLAN 1, we can talk. Networking is its own little niche area, and I mean, little's a bad term. It's a very large area. But it can be a very complex area, which is why companies hire IT people to take care of that network. They want to make sure that everything is running and running well and properly and things like that. So if you want to get into networking and setting up computers and dealing with all that stuff, Cisco is a possible option for you. HTC does have an IT specialist area, I believe. Network operational requirements. So in order to function on a network, there are a few things that we have to have. First, we have to have a means of communicating the nodes on the networks, so cables or wireless technology. Now, traditionally, for a normal computer network, we are operating on Ethernet nowadays, at least in the small home networks and things like that. There are a few other options, which we'll talk about in a minute. So Ethernet or wireless, I guess I should say. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, or seconds ago, slides ago, whatever, for wireless, we are right now mainly operating at 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. So those are the two frequency options that we are mainly focused on. 2.4 is the more older one, and the benefit there is that we have more penetration. So the wireless signal from your router will travel a farther distance with lower signal loss compared to the 5 gigahertz. Benefit of the 5 gigahertz is you have a higher data rate. So there is a give and take here. So ideally, if you have a gaming computer or server or something that you have connected via wireless, which you really shouldn't have overall for devices that are going to have high bandwidth needs and things like that. But if you do, you're going to want to be on the 5 gigahertz network and be somewhat close to that router so you have a very strong signal. Now, if you have things like your phone or laptop or things like that that don't need a super high data bandwidth, the 2.4 gigahertz is the better option. So we need to have some sort of means of communicating. Each device needs to have special hardware that allows the nodes to communicate with each other. So that would be our network interface card. And again, that could be wireless or Ethernet. And then you also need to have software that allows the network to run on each device. So if you have your game consoles, they need to have special software so they know how to communicate with everything going on and be able to access the internet. So there is a lot going on there when it comes to your network requirements. Now, when it comes to transmission media, all right, we've already talked about how we have wireless or wired, and wireless being 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz, all right. However, when it comes to wired networks, the one that we use the most is called twisted pair, or that's what Ethernet cable is. And there are different variations to Ethernet cable. You have Cat 5, 5E, 6, 6E. I think there might even be a Cat 7 at this point in time. And depending on the different categories that you're going with, there are different benefits and whatnot. So Cat 6E, I believe, is probably what I would be putting in my house if I was going to be running network cable at this point. It is unshielded twisted pair. That's what the U stands for. Basically, there is no shielding around it to protect it from interference, and that's the whole point of the twisting. The twisting helps reduce the interference and things like that that are affecting the Ethernet cable. And that would be that bottom leftmost picture. The bottom rightmost picture, that would be our coaxial cable. So this is actually most likely what you have coming into your house for your internet connection. And we'll come back to that one in a little bit when we talk about our ISPs. So most likely you have a coax cable coming into your house. Not guaranteed, but most likely. And the one in the middle, this is kind of the most exciting one to me, and that is fiber optic cable. All right, and that one is actually using light pulses to send data. And the benefit of the fiber optic is it has a much higher data rate compared to a traditional Ethernet cable or even the coax. So you can see maybe, gigabits or multi-gigabit network connections from building to building or things like that because of that fiber optic cable. So that is huge, and we can also travel very long distances. And the really fun part is fiber optics, where we have this little plastic tubes, just like you would think, and what's inside that is a small either glass or plastic fiber that is optically clear. Glass is going to be the higher end compared to the plastic. And the key here is it has to be flexible. Now, a very thin string of glass is still flexible, so luckily they can make that work. But fiber optic is a pretty neat option when it comes to data connections. This is not really being used for computer yet. All right, we're not at that point in the technology. It's still too expensive of a device to do. But when we're talking about network switches and routers and things like that, especially if we're going building to building and whatnot, we need a lot of bandwidth capability. Fiber optics is a great choice for those long distances. Now, you may have seen commercials a while ago for Fios, or cable. I think Comcast has a fiber optic connection where they'll bring fiber optics to your house, so you can get a stupid high download and upload speed compared to what you're getting over the coax. But price is also the game there. So those are kind of our main options when it comes to transmission. We have unshielded twisted pair, or UTP. You have fiber optics, and you have coax. And then, as we talked about with wireless, you have 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So, some basic network hardware, all right? Every device is going to have a network interface card. We're going to start with that one, a NIC, all right? And again, that NIC could be a wired NIC or it could be a wireless NIC, all right? And depending on the device, you can get external ones. So you can get like a wireless card that you plug in via USB, or an Ethernet that plugs into USB, or USB-C if you have a laptop that doesn't have an Ethernet port and you want those faster speeds. So there is that option. We also need a network adapter, and this is also kind of basically the NIC. So if it's integrated, that's going to be a NIC. If it's not integrated, it's not the NIC, it's just a network adapter. Now, traditionally, you're going to have a modem, and this translates the signals from analog to digital and back again. All right. So the modem in your house, especially if you have coax coming in for your internet, that is taking the digital signals from your router and converting that to analog to be sent out over the coax cable, and then it also takes a coax analog in and converts it to digitals for your network. So that is the job of a modem, and overall that's a very important job. If we don't have that analog conversion there, analog to digital conversion, you're not going to have any network. So very important. Now, another important device is going to be your router. Your router is kind of like the brains of the operation of your home computer network. It takes the information coming from all the different devices in, and it determines which direction they should go. Should they go out to the WAN port? Should they go to the LAN port? Do they need to shot out the wireless back to a different part? So a router transfers packets of data between two or more networks, all right, or on a single network back and forth. And then the last part is a switch. And a switch acts like a traffic signal in the network. Now, basically all network or routers have a switch built into them. Maybe not some of the smaller ones, like some of the Apple ones and things like that, but most home routers are going to have a switch built into them. So if you see 4 ports on the back for the LAN section, that itself is a little small switch built into it. You can get external switches. In fact, I have one sitting right down here by my desktop. So I have my router located about as centrally on the house as I can, so right in the middle. And then I have multiple computers down in the basement, which is the computer I work at, plus my server. So I put a small switch down here so I can plug devices into that as I need to. So I took one port up on my router and I broke it off into, I believe, 6 ports down here by my computers. And that allows me, to have my desktop and server down here. It also allows me to plug a laptop or other Ethernet device spaced in when I am problem solving, or I get something new and I'm setting it up, or whatever the purpose is. So it allows me some extra capabilities to have another switch down here. Now, at that same point, the switch, you can have a switch and you can have a hub when it comes to Ethernet ports. A switch is a smart hub, basically. So it tries to redirect the flow. So in theory, if you had a hub and you had 2 computers connected to it, the computer A talks to the hub, which then sends the information to the router, which may send it back to the hub, back to computer B. So it may go A hub, router, hub, B. Where if you have a switch, it may just go A, switch, B. So it kind of skips going back to that router. So the router is not having to do as much work if you have a separate switch. So that is just something to think about. So as you can see here on our little network setup, we have a home gateway in the kind of like top middle section, all right, which does have 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. We have an Ethernet, which goes to a switch, and then that switch goes to our laptop. We also have a power line. That one's kind of fun. You can get Ethernet to power line adapters. So basically, if you have devices that are located farther away, but you want to have network there, and you can't have the capability of running an Ethernet cable, maybe you're in an apartment or whatever, you can get a special piece of hardware which will take your Ethernet signal in and modulate a signal going over your power line. So it's actually sending signals over your power, like in the outlet itself. And then you can plug another one in somewhere else in your house, and it will pull that signal out and then provide you Ethernet there. So that's what that orange wire is. It's saying we've got a power line Ethernet adapter going to our set-top box by our TV, which then has Ethernet going to the TV itself. We have our Wi-Fi extender here because we might have poor Wi-Fi in our house because we don't have our router in a good location. So that's supplying wireless. So all sorts of things going on here. Newer devices like laptops, smartphones, things like that are actually able to possibly connect to both the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi at the exact same time. So something to think about. Higher bandwidth capabilities. So for your broadband internet connection that you have at home, as we've already talked, the whole point of having a home network is to share the internet connection between devices, right? So you don't have just one device connected. In theory, if you only had one desktop at home, you could have your modem plugged directly into your desktop and all would be fine with the world, all right? But most of us have a cell phone and a tablet and a laptop and a desktop and a wife or our kids, and and there's all these devices, all right? I always find it interesting to count how many devices are on my home network at home. So in our house, we have at least 24 devices that will connect to our Wi-Fi network. And that doesn't include like friends coming over and bringing their phones or family or things like that. It's like when my parents come, they have 2 phones that connect, they have their laptop that'll connect. So that takes up us to 27. And that number can just keep going up and up and up. So you may have a lot of devices that are working on your home network that are then talking out to the internet or talking with each other. So that's just something to think about. So you most likely are purchasing your internet access from an ISP or an internet service provider. All right. So that's how us homeowners are at least doing it. Some businesses or large organizations have a dedicated connection to the internet, but most small businesses and homeowners, we're going to get it from our ISP. And your ISP, if you're located in Hagerstown, is probably Antietam Cable. You might also have Comcast or Verizon or all sorts of other options out there, but those are kind of the big ones locally, at least. All right. Now, broadband is the preferred way to access the internet, but in some situations, cellular or dial-up access might be necessary. All right. So when we have broadband, we have made all 3 different types. You have your cable, we have DSL, and fiber optic. And as you can see on the little chart down there, so cable, this is going to be your coax, which is going to be basically what we used to plug into the back of our TVs, which I don't know many people that actually have a direct coax connection to the back of their TV anymore. Most of the time it's coax to the TV box, the set-top box that allows you to control the guide and all this other fancy stuff. And then that set-top box will then connect to your TV via HDMI. So speeds are shared for cable connections or coax connections. So like if our internet service provider only has 100 megabits per second to distribute, which would be ridiculously low, but and I have a 50 meg connection, my other 2 neighbors have 50 meg connections, and we're all trying to use that at the same time, we're only going to get 30 megs each. So even though we're paying for 50 megs because too many people are using the internet, we're only going to get 30 of that. So that is something to think about. So during high usage periods, your speeds may drop. Average speeds of 110 megabits per second with a maximum of 30 megs per second for coax. Now I have seen, I believe, as high as 100 or so. So just because it says the average speed is that and the max is 30, it's not really that anymore. Maybe it's the max average of 30. So I don't know. I said I now have 50 meg at home. 30 would have been fine, but Antietam had a deal on the 50, so I was like, let's just go with that one. Next option, which is nowhere near as good, is your DSL, your digital subscriber line. So this is a copper wire phone line, so you're actually talking over a phone. And the big problem here is speeds drop at at large distances from the main signal source increases. So if you're really close to where that your phone line is going, it's fine. But as you get like out in the middle of nowhere, your speeds are going to drop drastically. So that is something to think about. Here, the average speed is only 3.7 megabits per second with a max of 15. So that is a lot lower. So DSL was huge back when dial-up, when DSL first came up and all you had was dial-up. And it was like, oh, you get a 56K, or you can get DSL and you can get multiple megabits per second. And it was huge. All right. Now, cable is kind of the big winner. DSL, it's used still, but nowhere near as often, or at least as often as I want to believe. And then last but not least is fiber optic, all right? And ideally it's optically pure glass, but plastic is also an option. We are going to transmit data via light, as I said earlier, and it's not going to degrade as much over long distances. There is still a max distance for fiber optics, but it's much greater than a traditional Ethernet or coax or DSL line, so that's good. Average speed here is 50 megabits per second with a max of 950, so huge speed increase there from cable to fiber optic. So, which is why a lot of people like fiber optic. They're like, oh, I'm getting this such great speed and all the other fun stuff, which is good as long as you actually have a real need for it. So that is something to think about. Now, one thing we haven't talked about yet is satellite internet. Not used very often, mostly in rural or mountain areas. So places where cable companies aren't covering, you're too far for DSL, fiber optic isn't there, you might not even have great cellular as an option, and dial-up is just way too slow. So satellite is an option, and basically you've got satellites that are floating around overhead of us. We do have stationary and we have geosynchronous. But basically you've got a satellite dish that is pointing from your house up towards those up in the sky, and you send up on a specific frequency of radio waves, hits that satellite, that receives it, that transmits it back down to the base station that is within that satellite coverage area, and we then go out to the internet. So this is an option. This is also going to be another terribly slow option. It's down there with DSL, if not slower. So still probably faster than dial-up, but not as fast as DSL. So this is why it's not used very often. It's also very expensive because there's very small frequency ranges and things like that that can be used. So not the best thing in the world there for internet access. Wireless internet access. So ideally when you are at home or using your mobile device, you are using Wi-Fi. All right. And even when you're out and about nowadays, there is Wi-Fi all over the place, and most of the time it is free. All right. And you should be a little questionable of that, because just because it's free doesn't mean it's good. All right. So you do want to make sure that you are, that you trust your Wi-Fi that you're using, because that could be an unscrupulous person there who's pulling all that data in and going to try to steal your credit card and yada, 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 yada. So be careful when you're connected to Wi-Fi out and about that is open and not secured and things like that. So make sure you trust it, and luckily most people just connect to whatever Wi-Fi they can, and they're just like, oh cool, free internet, I'm good, because otherwise I have to use my mobile data. All right. So when you're away from home, if you're on your phone, you're just connected right to your cellular network, and you have mobile data access if you have add on your account. Most smartphones nowadays do have the option to create what's called a mobile hotspot, or as we can see on the Apple phone here, a personal hotspot. All right, and this creates a Wi-Fi network on your phone from your phone that allows your laptops and things like that to connect to it and use your phone as a way to access the internet. Traditionally, this is going to burn through your data that you have like crazy. If you ever are interested and you have the opportunity, look at how much internet you use at your home network in a month. And you're looking at probably 200, 300, 400 gigabits of information or data being transferred. Where on your phone, you might be limited to like 5 gigs a month or something like that. So you do want to use this personal hotspot carefully. And depending on your plan, you may or may not actually have may or may not have the capability truly to have a mobile hotspot, even though you may do it. So that is something else that you want to make sure that you are careful there. Now, we are at 4G or 5G now. You might hear it called LTE or things like that. And the new wireless standards, they are getting some absolutely crazy speeds out, depending on the frequencies they're being used. But as you remember, or hopefully remember from earlier, we talked about how 2.4 gigahertz has very high penetration, so it can get through walls and things like that before its signal strength degrades too much, compared to 5G, where you put like 2 walls in front of it and you've lost a lot of your signal, so you lost a lot of your capability. Same thing is going with the newer wireless capabilities, where you have super speed Wi-Fi capabilities on the new phones, but you have to be within line of sight of the antenna. And I've watched a few YouTube videos on it where like the person's like, here I'm connected, and they take one step to the left, and then they're like, and here I'm not. And I mean, like, you just see the speeds just drop off like crazy. So the new wireless capabilities are absolutely amazing, high speeds, but you still need to be in line of sight for those to work. Now, they do have the new wireless technologies that are using the lower frequencies, so you're not seeing quite as high speed, but you still are seeing some other benefits and capabilities from that. So that is something that you want to think about. Yeah, and you may actually have better internet speeds on your phone over 4G than you actually do at your house. I know that's true on my phone. It's definitely true with the newer wireless communication, newer cellular connections and whatnot that are going on. So, something to think about when you're dealing with that. But remember your cost of that data plan, all right, and how much data you actually have and can use and things like that. And does a person really need 100 megabits per second on their phone? No. All right. Streaming 4K Netflix, I think, is like 15 megabit, and you probably can't be doing more than 1 or 2 of those on your phone at the same time. So, you might need like 30 megabit per second. We don't really need anything faster than that for a phone. Now, maybe on your laptop, you might need a better connection speed, or especially with self-driving cars and things like coming out nowadays, having that higher speed capability may be very, very important. So that is something to think about when these new wireless standards are coming out, and what are they going to be used for and things like that. I think the Super Bowl, they were streaming over the new wireless standard. That was the only way to get extremely low latency and have wireless cameras, so they didn't actually have to have them plugged in to be getting the live feeds from them. So pretty neat in the long run. When it comes to planning your home network, the first thing you need to do is list all the devices that are going to be using on your network. All right. So this includes computers, desktops, and laptops, gaming systems, Xbox, PlayStation, Wii, tablets, Android tablets, Apple tablets, iPads, whatever else other tablets they might have. How many phones are you going to have? What IoT devices are you going to be using? Are you going to have smart outlets? You're going to have a smart thermostat. You can get connected fridges nowadays, and washers and dryers and ovens, so you can turn your oven on remotely. So while you're driving home, you can have your oven preheating. All right. One of my IoT devices that my parents love is the thermostat in their house, because when they're now retired and they go on vacation, when they're coming home, they can be like, oh, it's 90 outside. Okay, turn the air on, an hour away, so when we get home, the house is cooled down. So they love their wireless thermostats that they have at their house. So something along those lines. And ideally, everything at your house you want to be using the latest standard for. All right. So that's going to get you the fastest experience and whatnot. Now, just because in theory you want to do that doesn't mean in actuality it actually is going to happen. All right. You're going to have older devices. We have a Wii that we still use every once in a while, like the original Wii, not the Wii U, not the Switch, the original Wii. And that's an older standard, so we have to make sure that our wireless router can actually have that capability to talk to that. So that is one of those things that you do want to be thinking about, which is why it's important to have all your devices listed. So that way, if you're going to go talk to somebody about network devices, you can say, here's what I want to have on my network. What device do you suggest? So that way you make sure that you actually get one that has the capabilities that you need. So that is something to be thinking about. So Ethernet speed becomes kind of important. Is 100 megabit per second good enough, or do you need 1,000 megabit or 1 gig? Or do you need 10 gig or 5 gig or 2 gig, or what type of connection speeds are there that you need? Again, I was watching some YouTube videos, and right now 10 gig Ethernet. You can have 10 gig Ethernet in your house. However, you need the newest Ethernet cable, and your length of your cable becomes very important. It has to be less than, I don't know, 100 meters or 300 feet or something like that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the full 10 gig out of it. So that's very important when it comes to not just your computers, but what other hardware do you have. So if you have a Cat5 cable running through your house, Ethernet cable running through your house, you can't get 10 gig over it. Now, 2 gig is the possibility, so that is something to think about. Back to Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. Which one do you need? Why do you need it? Are there devices that are only going to connect to 2.4? Or is 2.4 the better option for you because of how far distances you need to run? So that is something that you need to think about. Now, if you are paying your ISP for a rental fee for your modem and router, you might want to consider saying, hey, I need a new one. This one's acting up, it's getting slow. I have new devices that it's not supporting properly, those types of things. And depending on your ISP, they will either replace it for free or for, again, a small fee. Ideally, it should be for free because, well, it is, you're renting it. So, there's that option. And man, I don't know whether I should tell you guys to rent your stuff or buy it. It's really kind of a crapshoot. You buy it, probably within a year or two, you'll have paid off the rental fee. You'll save money compared to renting it. But when it goes bad, you then have to replace it again. So there is a bit of a give and take. Some people love that when their router goes bad, they just call up Comcast and go, hey, my router broke, send me a new one. Or, they stop by the store, pick a new one up, and they drop their old one off the next day or whatever. So there's a lot of give and take here when it comes to network hardware. On the screen, I have a whole bunch of different wireless routers. We have 2 from Linksys, 1 from Netgear, and the capabilities of these are all different. Notice the one Linksys only has 2 antennas, the other ones have 3. You can get gaming routers that have like 6 or 8 different wireless antennas sticking off of them now, and they're starting to look kind of crazy in my opinion. But the more antennas means more directional capability of directing or beaming the information a specific way, which increases your data bandwidth and things like that. So they are doing all sorts of crazy things with wireless routers nowadays to increase wireless speeds and things along like that. So having newer hardware, it may not be a bad idea. At the same point, if you're like, hey, I'm happy with how my network's working, I don't want to screw things up, then by all means, don't change your hardware. All right. Another option that you could use to possibly bring your older hardware back to life is open source firmware. So a lot of wireless routers, you can update the firmware on them to something not provided by the manufacturer. One of the big ones is OpenWRT or DDWRT, or there's one called, I believe, OpenTomato or something like that. And that will give your old hardware new life. It's not going to teach it any new tricks per se. It's not going to be like, oh, your 2.4 gigahertz wireless router now has 5 gigahertz. No, it can't do that. But it may make your old hardware come back to life where it was acting slow. Maybe there was a security hole or something, or a software bug where, it slowed down over time, those types of things. So one thing to take into account. Another thing is maybe you just need to reset your router every day. Something's filling up because of, again, a programming problem. So just turn your router off, turn it back on once a day, and it makes your life, might make everything work better. Or your ISP you may have an internet connection where if your modem's been connected too long, it starts to act funny. So again, you need to turn it off, turn it back on to bring it back to life. So, things like that. Same thing with your phone and computers. Turning them off every once in a while is not a bad thing to do. Now, when it comes to connecting your devices to your networks, the big thing you're going to probably use is a router. All right. On the right here, I have one of Apple's routers, and we can actually see on it there are a few different ports. So if we look very closely, you'll see that you have those 3 symbols which are the same, and that one is different. All right. So just something to think about. So those 3 on the right, that would be your LAN port. And the one on the left would be your WAN port. So that one's the one that's going out to the World Wide Web. So really, again, just something to think about in the long run. Those 3 would be your switch. So, something to think about as well. Just, do I need 3 ports is all I need for wired devices, or do I need more? Do I have to buy an extra device, an extra external switch? All right. So Apple has designed these routers that are optimized for working with Apple computers. However, Windows machines can also connect to it. So if you have multiple Apple and Windows devices, they are a great option for your household. That is not to say that a standard old Linksys wireless router won't allow you to connect an Apple device to it. It's just not optimized according to Apple. So something to think about. But again, you're paying an Apple tax there. I hate to say that, but Apple, don't get me wrong, Apple makes a very good device, but it is really expensive for what you get in the long run. All right. Another very interesting aspect here is, if you notice, this has a USB port on it. And a lot of routers nowadays are starting to include USB ports on them. And it's for one of two reasons. It's either A, to turn your wireless router into a very cheap NAS, or network attached storage, which we'll talk about in the next page. So you can plug an external hard drive or flash drive or something like in there, and then all of your devices on the network could always access those files. Another option for why it has an USB port is so you could plug a printer in. So you could have your wired old school USB based printer that doesn't have Ethernet or Wi-Fi, and you can plug it in there and then again have a USB printer that anybody can print to. So one of those two options is why that USB port is there. It also may be used for firmware update and other things like that, but mainly it's meant for storage or things like that, at least on the non-Apple devices. I'm not so sure what the Apple AirPort has that on there for. So, but routers are going to be one of the big things that you're going to be looking at purchasing. Now, another option or something you might need to consider is either a Wi-Fi repeater or access point or something along those lines. If your house is big enough that you have bad Wi-Fi in a specific area, then a Wi-Fi repeater or an access point is a great option for you. So they will allow you to extend your wireless to farther reaches of the house. So if you have, your wireless router's on the top floor and you have a basement and you're like, I get really slow internet down there, it might be worth having an access, either an access point connected via Ethernet, so run an Ethernet cable from your router upstairs through the walls all the way downstairs to your basement, and put a wired access point in there. So at that point you have laptop connects to access point, which goes via Ethernet back to your router, which is the better option of the two. Or you can use a Wi-Fi repeater where you plug this device into any outlet in your house, and as long as you put it between where you have you basically want to put it right at the edge where you have great service. You want to have that access point where it still has good service by the main router. But you want to put it close enough to where you have bad service that you get good service there now. So it is definitely a fine line there of where do you put your wireless range extender. But basically what that does is it connects to your wireless router and then it rebroadcasts that signal. So it's your device connects to the wireless access point, or the range extender via Wi-Fi, which then connects to the main router via Wi-Fi. So there is going to be a bit more lag there, or bit more delay going on between your computer and the internet, but it's better than not having internet down there. So one of those things to think about. So some specialized home networking devices that you might get is a NAS, or a network attached storage. So down here I show you a little NAS. This is a 2-bay job from Synology, and this is where you would put all of your different files and things like that you want to protect. Now this could be for backup purposes, so you could have these two drives set up in like a RAID 0, I believe it is, where one hard drive just mirrors the other one. So if one hard drive fails, you still have all of your data. Or you could have them in where you just have two hard drives, so you have lots and lots and lots of storage. So if you have two 4 terabyte hard drives in there, you now have 8. Where if you're using RAID 0, you'd only have 4. So a little bit of give and take there. Most likely 4 terabytes will last you years and years and years and years, as long as you're not a data hoarder like I am. So something to think about. So manage network data. This app provides centralized point for all of your data. Again, some NASs might be able to run printers off of them, so it's basically a small little server. All right. A NAS is different than a home network server, so that is something to think about. A home server has normally more capabilities than a NAS. So a NAS, traditionally the processor and RAM and whatnot in there are specifically designed to handle the capabilities of the hard drives and network attached storage that you're going to need. So how many hard drives you're going to have in there, what type of what type of processing power do you need, it's going to be built down to a price, obviously, because I don't want to sell you a $10,000 computer to handle just data holding. All right. But a server, which could be a $10,000 computer, is going to have a lot more capability. It's going to have a lot more processing power. You could have virtual machines. You could have hard drives for storing data. You could be running Pi-hole for blocking ads or other services on there. So there's a lot that a home network server can do that a NAS can't, or at least a traditional NAS wouldn't want to do. It might be capable of doing it, but it's not going to do it as well as a normal home server. So there is a little bit of a give and take there. And then a network-ready device can be connected directly to a network through either a wired or wireless connection. So it's basically ready to go out of the box. Just plug it in or connect to Wi-Fi and you are good to go. Now, when it comes to wireless networks problems, all right, the first thing we need to think about is the range for wireless networks at best is about 350 feet. And that's like you put your wireless router in the middle of a field, you can go 350 feet from it and you should still see the signal. All right. However, in your house, that has changed because you have walls and floors and large metal objects like refrigerators and other sources like that that are going to interfere with your wireless signals. So, depending on what your house is made of or things like that, your wireless signal may only go 50 feet from your wireless router. Most likely you're probably going farther than that, maybe 100 or so. But you're only going to go a little, you're not going to go as far, basically. So as you put more and more things between you and that wireless access point or a router, your signal is going to degrade more and more and more. And again, depending on frequency, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz, you're going to see different degradation because the lower frequencies penetrate better. So 2.4 will be able to go through more walls before you lose it, but it only has a max speed of like maybe 54, 100 megabits per second, where 5 gigahertz won't go as far, so maybe it goes through one wall before you lose the signal, but it has a much higher bandwidth capability. So there is a lot of a give and take here. All right, we've already talked a little bit about using a range extender to amplify your wireless router signals. All right, so and I do have that little picture over there. So this would be a Wi-Fi range extender. So most likely one antenna would be bringing Wi-Fi in, the other antenna would be shooting Wi-Fi back out. And the other benefit of a Wi-Fi range extender is most of them do have an Ethernet port on them. So that either becomes an Ethernet to Wi-Fi, so you can plug my desktop into that Ethernet port, and this would then give it Wi-Fi access. Or you could actually have your Ethernet come into that and then have it just shoot it out these wireless. So there are multiple options when it comes to these range extenders. And again, make sure you're getting one that fits your needs. So if you need to have 5 gigahertz, make sure you have one that is capable of running at 5 gigahertz. If you only need one that has 2.4, well, 2.4 might be enough. Oftentimes you will see these range extenders. People will set them up where they'll have a 5 gigahertz dedicated link coming into it. So they get the higher speed coming to it, but they'll only distribute 2.4 gigahertz out. So it takes high speed in, but then it can distribute that high speed to multiple devices and still keep the max speed of all of those devices. So there's a bit of a give and take going on here. Now, securing your Wi-Fi is going to be very important, all right? And we're going to come kind of full circle here. I'm going to pull up a simulated wireless router so we can kind of talk about all this stuff. I may even bring up my own wireless router so we can look at some of the things that I've got going on there. So, securing your wireless router. Encryption is going to be very important, and there are a few options. You know what? Let's just go there now. So here we have a Linksys router configurer. Now traditionally you would go to your router at the IP address listed right here, which on this Linksys is 192.168.1.1. So if you would type that in your web browser, it would pop up the logon screen. Let's see if I can get back to that one. Linksys router simulator. Here we go. We'll click here, scroll down. That one looks good. So you type in that 192.168.1.1, it'll take you to this type of page. You'll type in your username, which is almost always admin unless you can change it, and the default password, which again is normally going to be admin. Make sure you change that password, all right? So fun fact, when I moved out to Indiana for grad school, I moved in with a few guys, and when I moved in, the guys weren't there, but I wanted to have internet so I could listen to music while I was unpacking and things like that. So I didn't know the Wi-Fi password. I didn't feel like texting the guy at that point asking because I knew he was at work. He didn't normally have access to his phone. So I just went downstairs and I plugged my laptop directly into the router. I went to the access page just like I'm right here, and I typed in, I Googled and said, what's the default for this router? And it told me this and this, and I said, okay, and I went and I hit login, and bam, I got in here. So I was like, well, that's nice. So I was able to get in without having to like ask anyone for the wireless password and whatnot. Found out later it was the guy's birthday with an extra 8 or something like that on the end. But anyway. So here we have a default Linksys page, all right? So this IP address here, 192.168.1.1, that is the IP address that it's going to overall distribute to your computers. And as you notice down here, it's going to start at 100. And this one is going to stop after there are 50 users on the network. So it's going to probably go, as you can see, 100 to 149, all right? And you have what's called a DHCP server, or a dynamic host communication protocol, I believe it is, which is what's giving out IP addresses. So anytime a new device connects to the network that is allowed based on security, it says, okay, here's your IP address. And the IP address has 2 different parts to it. The first, in our case, for a home network, the first 3 part is the network. So 192.168.1. That is the network address. The last one is the node, or the device address. So you're normally, .1 is the router. So you would see like 100 or 123 or 156 or whatever it is that your computer has. And traditionally, you're just going to give those out at random as based on the DHCP server and when they connect and all those other wonderful things. However, you can set some what's called static IPs and things like that. So that way, like my desktop always has the same IP address. My server always has the same IP address. So that way when I'm trying to print something, that printer is always at the same location. So it keeps everything working nicer. And the reason we know that the first 3 digits, or 3 numbers of this are the network and the last one is the node is because of the subnet mask. So here you see we have 255.255.255.0. So I mean, that tells us that all of the bits for the first 3 are network and the last 8 bits are node. You can change that. So if we did .128, only 4 of the last 8 bits would be node and the first 4 would still be network. That's not something I'm expecting you guys to understand or truly get, but I just like to point that out for you. This 3rd digit, the .1, that can change. You could have this anywhere between 0 and 255. So you could do 192.168.52 or 83 or 96 or 128 or whatever magic number you want there. And that would be fine. And by default, it seems like most routers either go .0 or .1. You could argue that a little bit of security would be changing that to a random number between 0 and 255, because then someone who just assigns themselves an IP on your address and doesn't get a DHCP one will have a harder time breaking into your network. So you, in theory, could change that for just an itty bit, like barely any extra security, but maybe just a little bit there. So on your home page, that's about it. Most modems will want a DHCP address. So most modems will have an IP address that they're going to give out to your router. So your internet setup, you just want to leave that DHCP alone and don't touch that. However, what we're really here for is when it comes to wireless. So let's go ahead to the wireless tab, and I'm just going to put this in manual mode because it makes my life a little bit easier. So notice we have network node, we have mixed, wireless AN only, or disable. So that's for our 5 gigahertz. Down here you have BG, BGN, or disabled. So B is only capable of 11 megabits per second, G is capable of 54 megabits per second, and wireless N is somewhere higher than that. So it really depends on what's going on at that time. So a little bit of give and take. So it might be 70, 800, not 100% off the top of my head. Wireless G, I don't know what the frequency numbers are off the top of my head, but really leaving everything as mixed is going to be your best option. Now again, a little extra security would be saying I only want G or N or something like that, and that will keep older devices and things like that off your network. So again, just like a little bit of extra security, extra protection, keeping random people from accessing your network. However, most likely if you've got a hacker coming in to your network, they're going to be coming in with probably better hardware than you have at home, so probably not going to affect them at all. So here you can see our network SSID, which is the name of our device, and SSID stands for Service Set Identifier. All right. So notice we have Linksys, in this case 00011_5 gigahertz. Down here we just have Linksys 00011. All right. So this one has 5 gigahertz in the name. This one doesn't. That just allows you to determine which network you want to connect your devices to. All right. Make sure they are different. All right. There are different channels that we can pick for our frequencies, and here you can see for the 5 gigahertz we have 536, which is 5.18, 40, which is 5.2, 44, all the way up. And notice the giant jump here is between the 5.2 and the 5.7 area. All right. So even though this is known as the 5 gigahertz bandwidth for Wi-Fi, it is not specifically at exactly 5 gigahertz. It does vary slightly. So you have 5.18 to 5.24, and then you have 5.7 to 5.8. So there is a different range there. And picking a channel is also very important. You can leave it at auto, and in theory at least, it should detect what is being used locally around you and pick something that's not on that. However, that is not always going to be the case. So here you can see the channel chart for 2.4 gigahertz, top and bottom, all right, using the 40 megahertz channel they're saying. But anyway, you can see channel 1 overlaps a lot with channel 2. So, channel 1 is, here, let me go ahead and start some screen drawing. Channel 1 is this frequency, and channel 2 is that. Focused, obviously, here and here. So, but there's a lot of overlap there. So if your neighbors are using channel 1, you probably don't want to use anything less than channel 7, because there's still going to be a little bit of overlap there in those frequencies. Ideally, we'd be sending very narrow bands, so we'd only be sending like this little itty bit here. Let me go ahead and shade that in with red. So ideally, we'd only want to be like sending that, but that also limits our bandwidth capabilities. So there is a lot of give and take here when it goes to picking your your channel and whatnot that you're using. So a lot of that goes on to picking your channel and whatnot when you're using. So picking your channel is important. So as I said, I try to use your phone. There's wireless scanners out there that will tell you what frequencies are being used and whatnot. If you're on HCC's campus, it's really interesting when you pull it up, because again, they're using like 1, 7, and 12 or something like that. So that way, all their stuff, there's no overlap between any, which allows them to have the best transfer or best distance and things like that of all the different Wi-Fi access points and things like that. So picking a specific channel is going to be a very important aspect for you. You can also pick your channel width, which may affect things. So something to think about. Now this SSID broadcast is, again, another one of those security things. It's much harder for someone to jump onto your Wi-Fi access point if they don't know what the name is, because when you're saying connect to Wi-Fi, normally we scan, we go connect to that one, and you pick it off the list. Well, if there's no name there, they can't connect to it. So that is a great option to disable to keep random people from trying to access your device. So that is a good security option. All right. We already talked about make sure you change your administrator password right here. So notice they allow us to change the password, but Linksys does not allow us to change the username. So it's always going to be admin. So that is something that you want to be aware of. Depending on your router manufacturer, or if you put open source software on there, you may be able to change the username as well. So that's also something that would be great for you to change. All right. So manual, disable your SSID broadcast. Now when it comes to security, notice all of the different options we have here. All right. Now I am not an expert on my wireless security and whether you should be using WPA/PA2 personal or not WPA personal or enterprise or mixed, or I'm not an expert on that aspect. One thing I do know is you do not want to use WEP. WEP stands for Wired Equivalency Protocol. So basically they're saying, this is as secure as wired is. Well, yes and no. All right, it may be as secure as wired. However, Wired, you need to physically get a wire and then like put a man in the middle, cut it, splice it, plug your stuff in, then you can start trying to hack it. Wireless WEP is, on the other hand, is you can be sitting outside the house with a device that just sits there and gathers data and gathers data and gathers data, and you just let it gather data for a day or two, and you come back and it goes, you can go process, and it'll go, hey, here's the password for you, and it'll just spits it out clear as day. So you can then type it in and you're good to go. WP, on the other hand, last time I checked, the only way to crack it is with what's called a dictionary attack, which means you have to go capture a data packet or whatever, and then you have to go home and you say, these are all the passwords I think it is, try them all, basically. And it'll go, try this, no, try it, no, 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 no. And then hopefully in that dictionary that you have is the actual password. Obviously, the larger the dictionary, the harder it, or the longer it will take to possibly crack it. So you want to be very careful when it comes to your passwords. So let's go with WPA mixed mode. All right, notice it's asking for a passphrase. That's what all of these are asking for. All right, and let's just go with hello world. And we can go save settings. All right, so that would be my passphrase. And then we could do the same thing down here and ask for a different passphrase. So you can actually have a different password on both. All right. And again, first you have to know the SSID if you have that disabled, which you should for security. Then you also have to know what the passphrase or a password or whatever you want to call it is. So your passphrase, you really want to have like not just a word, you want to have multiple words with symbols and everything interlaced, just like every other password you should have out there, because that makes it much more complicated to break into your system. So another thing that you want to be careful of is guest access, all right, which may be great because it keeps you from having to tell your friends that, oh, my wireless password is this, and giving out your actual wireless password, who then maybe tell it to someone else, who tells it to someone else, who tells it to someone else, and finally, you don't know who has your password to your actual access anymore, all right? So you can allow guest access. However, most of the time, guest access, if your router has this feature, will not put them on the same network as everything else. So this would be what's called like a virtual LAN. So your main computers and whatnot would be on VLAN 1, and all of the guests would be on VLAN 2. So it's basically saying VLAN 1 can't talk to VLAN 2. So if you're on the guest network, you can't talk to my TV, you can't talk to my fridge, you can't talk to my desktop, my server, my NAS, whatever it is. All you can do is go out to the internet, which may be all they need to do. And probably on average, that is all they need to do. However, if one of your guests needs to print something, then you have to put them on your personal. So a guest might be a good option for you, which will just, again, a little bit of security to keep your people separate from your other devices. So probably something that is worth having enabled. And maybe that SSD you do allow to broadcast. So that way when your friends come over, you can be like, yeah, connect to our Wi-Fi. It's called SuperNet, and it's really your guest network. So they're not on your main access point. All right. So something to think about. And there are all sorts of other options up here. So here, this router that I'm emulating has a storage option. You can see they've got a 3.6 gigabyte flash drive plugged in, and it looks like we're sharing that. So like anybody who connects to it, if they go to this IP address and they're like, on their in their file explorer on Windows, they could then access this USB drive to put files or whatever. So nice little thing that they got going on there. Now, sometimes some of your applications will need to open ports out to the internet, and this is like poking holes in a wall. The more ports you have open, the higher likelihood of someone being able to hack into your system. So you really don't want to open multiple ports and things unless you absolutely have to. So something to take into account. And there are all sorts of other options on here. So you have access policies, so you can actually, like, if you have kids and be like, you don't get internet from this time to this time. And, so if I enable this, and I can say add, and I can say set up parental controls for this device. And then I could say, block internet, and I could say specific time. And look, anything with school nights and weekends, so you can change different things, or you can block specific sites. So, routers are trying to do us parents a favor and help protect our kids and help protect our networks, almost more importantly, because kids will just click on anything and you never know what they're going to download onto your computer. So, on that note, don't let your kid use your normal good computer. Give them a crappy one on a protected network. Good enough that it works, but not one of the newest pieces of hardware out there. So, just something to think about. Another thing is when we come back to this administration panel, notice that we have our local management. So that says access via HTTP. You probably would actually better be to HTTPS, not HTTP, which allows you to access this securely. So even if there was someone attempting a man-in-the-middle account on your local network, they would not still be able to access your password in plain text. It would still be encrypted. So having HTTPS included for your local management would be good. Now, remote management, on the other hand, this is a very important thing to think about, which is you probably want that disabled. There is no good reason that you should need to be able to configure your router while you're at work or anything else like that. Because if you do have that enabled, anyone can type in your IP address and then they would get that login page just like we saw, and then they could start trying to hack into your network that way. So something you do want to be very careful about. You should have remote access management disabled. Also have anything remote you really should do. You should do everything you can from home. I do like that this router even has an access via wireless, so I could disable that and say you have to be plugged in via Ethernet to be accessing this page, which is kind of an interesting system. All right, so you want to be careful about that. You should also try to make sure that you keep your router firmware up to date. So if we notice this one says firmware version 1.0.00 at the very top. I have no clue what firmware version this router is on, but keeping your firmware up to date will keep from having security flaws and things like that from people from accessing stuff that they shouldn't, especially if you have security cameras or all those other fun things. We've all heard about people hacking the wireless security cameras and talking through them and telling a kid they're Santa Claus and things like that. It is bad news bears. All right, so something to think about. Now, one of the big other security problems people like to talk about is UPnP, which is Universal Plug and Play. All right, and this is allowing all the devices to automatically set their stuff up so they can talk to each other and all of their fun stuff. And it's a great feature to have. It makes our lives as individuals at home who don't know a lot about computing great. However, security-wise, it is not the best thing out there. So read up on UPnP, and you're going to have to make your own decision on whether that's something you want to keep enabled on your network or you're going to want to disable it. So something along those lines. And overall, I think that is it. I highly suggest that you go look at your router configuration and start to look into things. I will quick show you my router at home. As you can see, I am on DDWRT. I've upgraded my firmware at some point, so that way I am using the custom firmware DDWRT, which allows me a lot more control options. So there's better access restriction, there's better wireless controls, those types of things. You can see all of my different clients and things like that down here. As I told you, I do have a lot of them going on. You can see my wireless information, the channel that my wireless is working on, transmit power, which is another good thing that you should be contemplating dealing with. As you can see here, my wireless rate is 216 megabits per second with my transmit power of 25 decibels. Changing your transmit power will help limit your signal range. So like if you live in an apartment complex or things like that, it would keep all of your neighbors from being able to access your Wi-Fi. So that is another possible security feature that you would want to think about. So just one of those wonderful things. All right, so that is all that I have for talking about wireless networks and computer networks.